a dual-pronged approach. Like there's a policing challenge that has to be met right now, and in order to reassure people in the communities, I mean, we talk about this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and under food and clothing is safety, and if people don't feel safe, then a lot of the other stuff is not going to work.
Well, how can people feel safe when we know that the Department of Justice have cut the Garda budget by, what is it, Michael, 79 million euro this year? How can, you know, those who are charged with protecting the citizens of this state do their job when there's 79 million less in the pot? That's the fundamental thing. The citizen must feel safe first.
I think the big challenge for Alan Chatter at the moment is, in a sense, actually the success of what was done in Limerick, because that was an example of where a coordinated response, heavily resourced, actually did deliver. And, you know, there's a very legitimate question, I think, that people in Tallaght could ask now as well. If that's good enough for Limerick, why is it not good enough for us? And in a sense, I think that's the question that the Minister will have to answer.
There are also some difficulties in relation to these feuds, because it's not like, you know, gang wars in Colombia. These are real up close and personal, and they're very, very, very intimate by their nature. You know, let's talk about the Drimna feud. That started between a group of friends, and it was started in a row over damage to a motorcycle. And one group lives and the other literally 100 yards away from the other. They pass each other every day, so that's extremely personal, and it's very hard to mediate and to get in the middle there and to stop these guys, because they know each other so well.
Well, just before we go to break, and I suppose I'll put this question out there. It's quite shocking when you see it in black and white. And if we look at what was spent on the prison service by the state, it's 374 million per year. Of that, 51.79 million for the probation service, 2.44 million by the state. Of that 51 million goes to community service. It is absolutely shocking that we need to address it at its very core, at the genesis of the problem. We're only spending that level of money on it.
Yeah, I think there's been cuts in, you know, estate managements in Tallaght, all over the country. There's been cuts, and these are people that actually are embedded in their communities, as are the two top police guys in Tallaght who are now retiring. We're going to lose an absolute, I suppose, historic kind of experience from these people. We don't know who's replacing them. There's a state of insecurity and uncertainty, and that certainly adds to the difficulties that are encountered by communities who may try and recover themselves, as Tallaght is, and in Brookview in particular. We try and recover, come together and wait for the opportunity to actually be proud of themselves and stand again. But the cuts in the community services are absolutely savage. And there's also an issue, Alan, in terms of judicial workloads, in the sense that sometimes, in some contexts, certainly in Limerick, you know, if the court system is very overloaded, you can have people who are out and back in, you know, while they're waiting to go to trial, and that can be a very serious problem as well.
I'm extremely worried about the number of senior Gardaí and experienced Gardaí retiring, not just in Tallaght, but all over.
Well, did the Minister not commit a number of weeks ago that he said that he would re-examine it, and he has already made an announcement that there would be further numbers pumped in there at senior level?
There were 51 vacancies, and 33 had been filled, so that's, you know, 27, 28 left. So every one of those appointments is vital, and they're not happening.
Okay, coming up next on this new special, the legitimate gun trade, how best can we police it? Welcome back to this TV3 News special on gun crime. There are almost 250,000 legally held firearms in this country. I went to one shop in Gorey, County Wexford, to see what it takes to buy a gun. So just how difficult is it to get a gun license? One man who knows, the proprietor of this store, Paul Walsh. Paul, I want to buy a gun. What do I need to do?
The first step you have to do is you have to decide what you want to shoot. If you want to hunt, you have to get land permissions. 2 farmers with enough land to prove that you're going to hunt on his land. You come to your firearm shop, then your gun shop. You pick whichever gun you're going to shoot.
Ordinarily, how long does it take from the point of me coming into your shop, from the point that I can walk out with that gun?
It'll take anything from 3 to 8, 9, 10 weeks in our experience. Each license is applicable specifically for one firearm. So when you've got your land permission, you come to the shop, you pick out your firearm, and we fill out one of these pieces of papers here so that the guards can write the license exactly for that firearm.
Okay, for the purpose of hunting, what would you suggest we get? And let's have a look at some of your
again,
stock.
it all depends. It all depends on what you're going to hunt, Alan. There's a bolt action rifle. That's a .17, right? It'll be the very same as a .22. It's a bolt action rifle with a magazine with a 5-shot capacity. This would be what we class as a kind of a crossover rifle that's suitable for hunting or for target shooting because of the heavy barrel on it. For a heavier calibered rifle, such as this, and you can see the size of the breech in this or the size of the bullet, you need a secondary license to prove that you're going to hunt deer. And that will be passed by the Office of Public Works. That proves to the guards that you not only have land permission, but there's also the game suitable on it for the heavier calibered rifle.
Is there a requirement that you must be part of a gun club?
No, you don't have to be a part of a gun club for a deer hunting license.
If you were to buy, we were talking about the .22 there earlier, what would that cost me?
A new .22 rifle would start maybe in around €350, and yet a very heavy, expensive target .22 rifle could cost €1,000 to €1,500.
What about the shotgun? Is it still a popular weapon? Is it a weapon of choice for hunters, for farmers?
Well, the shotgun is probably the most popular firearm in the world. This is a pump action, it's a semi-automatic. This is a restricted firearm now.
Why?
Because it has a pistol grip on it. Right? This again requires a more in-depth type of licensing where you have an interview with your chief superintendent because it is a restricted firearm because it has a pistol grip on it. There's only one justification in this country to have a pistol, that's target shooting. So at the moment under the current legislation you can get a .22 target pistol such as this revolver. You must be a member of a recognised and authorised club, and that's a .22 target revolver.
Why the disparity then in terms of the requirements for this versus the hunting rifle here, for example?
We have a better tradition of hunting in this country, and the public and the system is a lot more used to hunters having big rifles. People, I don't think, really have got used to the whole idea in this country just yet of civilians having handguns.
We have seen in the past in this country where legally held weapons were used in fatalities.
Abbey Lara set a benchmark in many respects because there was a tribunal after it to find out what had gone wrong. And one of the modules of that tribunal under Justice Barr addressed the whole issue of firearms licensing. And the recommendation from Barr was that superintendents should meet with the clubs twice every year.
Are they doing that?
They haven't met a single club since 2006.
So in essence, you can have the best legislation in the world, but it goes back to the salient point. If it's not policed correctly, you might as well not have it at all.
Well, if you're not going to implement the legislation correctly, you're going to have a flawed system.
It's reasonable to say that in Norway their legislation would be pretty tight as it is here in Ireland, and nobody in Norway could ever conceive that what happened there could potentially happen anywhere,
but
including Ireland.
It could happen anywhere, but you can't legislate for this. If anybody seriously thinks, for example, that the removal or the further tightening up of gun laws is going to eliminate that possibility, then I have to suggest you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's not. If people become desperate and they want to get their hands on firearms, whether it's firearms or anything else, they will get their hands on it and they will commit the act. A lot of these are societal problems which need to be addressed in an entirely different way. We provide everything that the system requires. It's up to the authorities and it's up to the state to implement those measures. It simply doesn't do it often enough.
Well, I mean, there's no question, Michael, but those who are engaged in the legitimate use of guns want to engage, they have engaged, the legislation is there, but their problem is it's not policed. Look at Abbey Lara, for example.
Well, I would argue that it is policed. The district officer...
Well, we heard Des Crofton there saying that, a superintendent has to meet with a gun club twice a year. It's not happening.
Yeah, well, the superintendent has to give a license to every applicant. So there'll be interviews there with restricted weapons.
But is an interview enough to give somebody a license? For example, if I went to my local Garda station, had an interview with the superintendent, who probably didn't know me for Adam, he would have done a little bit of background investigation into me and decided yay or nay, and that's it. Where is the policing after that? For example, if I, have suffered from some form of psychiatric problems, I shouldn't be the holder of a gun.
And Garda keep an eye on that. If you are involved, say for example you have a conviction, if you have a gun license and you have a conviction for violence, that gun gun is taken off you automatically. So there are rules in place for anybody. It's not as if you get a gun and then they leave you alone. They do check on you and they do keep an eye on you, and if you do break the law in a serious way, the gun is taken off you. So there are checks and balances in the system.
The reality is you can't ban guns.
In an international context, I mean, our gun regime would already be considered relatively restricted. I mean, and a lot of the issues that emerge in terms of gangland crime and that are with guns which are illegally held and come in as part of drug shipments, as Mick said earlier on. Essentially, there is a difficulty that I would see that the key issue is actually drug addiction, and the kind of the enforcement and the issues that emerge in that industry, as opposed to the actual issue around legally held guns, which I mean, there'll always be people who want to hunt. I mean, I think the restrictions which we have still on the smaller guns are I would very much support them, because there is the continuing issue of concealment.
Okay, we're coming rapidly towards the end of the programme, but I want to try and just for a moment look at possible solutions to what is a monumental problem, and it has to be multifaceted, Dave. And, if we look at what the Irish Penal Reform Trust Board talked about, they talked about that very notion of looking at a variety of measures that must be implemented to try and tackle it, and all we're really doing is just scratching the surface.
Yeah, the Penal Reform Trust had a report out 2 weeks ago which focused very much on early intervention strategies, and this is something that I looked again at in the Limerick context, which are strategies that would focus on interventions really from the ages of 0 to 5 of children who are at risk. I suppose one of the issues that I feel needs to be addressed within that, and really hasn't been fully addressed, is the question of engagement. That one of the things that I found in Limerick is that families who were maybe slightly at risk were quite good to engage, but often the families who were most deeply enmeshed in trouble, in addiction, were the ones who were the most reluctant to engage with any of these services, because they're afraid of child protection and they're afraid that their children will be taken away from them. And that's a kind of a social policy issue that we have to face up to. What do we do if we're going to look at early intervention as strategies for dealing with crime? What do we do around the family that doesn't want to engage? And that's an issue that has to be looked at.
Is that common, do you believe, more globally, as it were, that there are those who do not want to engage for whatever reason? And if they don't engage, you can't help them.
No, there are certain families who won't engage. The majority of the families that I've come in contact with walking around the estate today and for the last week have been absolutely positive about attempting to keep their children safe, to keep their children away from drugs, away from gangs. There are few who absolutely figuratively put two fingers up at society, at their own communities, and are destructive towards it. And that's the challenge. I think we get a more cohesive community who will probably eventually be able to face these
Is it not extraordinary, though, that report after report, wherever it's commissioned in what country, the body of it may differ slightly, but the conclusion will always be the same, that there has to be early intervention. Yeah. And looking at it in the cold light of day, if you do a cost-benefit analysis, pumping money in the early stages will save you a tremendous amount towards the latter stages. So why has there been an abject failure, Niamh, to engage?
Well, I mean, there's a broader issue. I mean, we've had huge debate in this country for the last 3 or 4 years around the whole question of children. And I mean, the weaknesses within our child protection system as a whole are very well known. One of the issues that I highlighted in terms of the research in Limerick is that since the 2001 Children's Act, the age of criminal responsibility in Ireland has been 12. And really we haven't, if we look at the juvenile justice responses that we have, things like diversion programs, they're aimed at the over 12s. And what we really haven't seen, apart from some piloting work that's been done in Limerick, is the development of interventions for children who are at risk under the age of 12. And that is a critical issue at the moment.
I think just to say that there is in Tallaght, there is funded, and it's an excellent programme. It's called the Childhood Development Initiative, and they're beginning to get reports out of the intervention between 0 and 5, and that's the critical age, and I think we all need to recognise that and work on it.
Okay,
when Gardaí get involved, it's too late. They're the firefighters. We've got to make sure that it doesn't get to that stage.
Right, well, I want to leave the last word with you, Michael. In your own professional assessment, how do you see this panning out in terms of gun crime in this country and the escalation in violence? Well, firstly, is the escalation perception or reality?
It's perception. Gun crime is down and gun murders are down.
But where do you see it going?
But, as I said earlier, it's the whole thing about statistics. As I said, there are probably 17 or 18 people alive tonight who will be dead by the end of this year, and they will die at the hands of guns. I don't want to say there's an acceptable level of violence, because there isn't, but even if we flooded the country with Gardaí, if we had an armed Garda on every street corner,